page 214. Often their bread was without butter that year, but that was not why the children remembered the calamity so vividly. They remembered it because on that day Mother had cried, the only time that they had ever seen her cry. After that, Father had built stronger fences, and the neighbor had been persuaded to shut his hogs in a pen. Now, when the summer woods and fields were at their pleasantest, Miss Parker came back from Durant and opened and swept the schoolhouse. Oh, how tedious it was to go in school in summer! Even churning on a cool back porch with a deep glass of buttermilk to drink afterward was heavily compared to school. Through the open windows of the schoolhouse came the sound of birds and droning bees, and the heavy odors of clover and milkweed in the blossoms. The eyes of the children kept wandering from their books to the window squares of green and gold where grasshoppers sang and heat shimmered in little wavy lines. Silas Bunn used to slip to the window when teacher wasn't looking, and hang out so far that only his heels and the seat of his trousers were visible to those inside the room. He had done it so often, with no remarks from the teacher, that he no longer took the trouble to be stealthy about it. One day, when he was hanging out, absorbed in watching a spider snare a fly, Miss Parker came up behind him. She stood and looked at him a moment while the children held their breaths, wondering what she would do. Presently she took a firm hold on the seat of Silas's pants and lifted him out the window. Miss Parker was not very big, but then neither was Silas. She set a surprised and frightened Silas neatly on the ground beneath the window. "There, Silas," said Miss Parker. "You get up and look all around, and when you have seen all there is to see, come back to school." It did not take Silas long to see all that there was to see. After that he was a wistful looker with the other children, but not a hanger-out. The children's voices droned sleepily through the heat like the voices of the bees and katydids. After Tom had sorted and wired together the many little bones of his rattlesnake skeleton, the teacher let him bring it to school and hang it over the map of North America. That made a little break in the monotony. And then there was another break, a more exciting one. A letter came from Boston for Mother from Cousin Annabel Gray. "I shall be charmed to visit you, dear Auntie Harriet," the letter said. "Mamma and Papa think that my education will not be complete with the view of the majestic open spaces of my native land. Although I have recently been finished at the Mrs. Blodgett's Seminary for Young Ladies, I myself feel that I may yet be able to acquire some useful information in the vicissitude of travel." "Wow," said Tom, when Mother read the letter. "Does she always talk like that?" "I imagine not," said Mrs. Woodlawn. "But it's a very pretty letter, isn't it? And what a delicate penmanship." Often over her slate or her reader Caddie's thoughts wandered to Cousin Annabel. The pleasure of her anticipation was sometimes marred by a pang of fear. What would a girl be like who could write such a letter? It sounded like a story from a mother's assistant or the young lady's friend, those tiresome stories which were so much less interesting than Hans Andersen's or Tom's. Caddie tried to imagine herself writing a letter to an aunt in Boston. No, Caddie Woodlawn would never write a letter like that. Couldn't she, or wouldn't she? She honestly did not know, but it made her a little ashamed and apprehensive to think about it. The summer grew hotter and drier. The Indians did not come back, and Father said it was because they could read the weather signs and knew that hunting and fishing would be better in the north. On hot evenings Tom and Caddie used to go down to the lake and take the canoe out to set lines for fish. Using empty corked jugs as floats, they anchored them in several places on the lake with baited lines attached to them. In the morning early, before school, they would go down and pull in the lines, and usually there would be a nice pike or two for Mrs. Conway to bake or make into chowder. John's dog went with them to the lake, his tongue hanging out and his eyes alert for any small fish which they might throw him. Just now John's dog was in disfavor at the farmhouse. He had bitten the head off one of Clara's pet kittens, and Caddie was the only one who continued to love and defend him. Like Mary's lamb, he used to follow her to school and sit mournfully outside the little building, waiting until she came out at recess and at noon. "What a horrid, ugly old Indian dog," said all the girls, but Caddie replied, "He's mine," and she said it so fiercely that seemed reason enough why everyone should like him. One afternoon John's dog set up a mournful howl outside the schoolhouse. It was a stifling hot afternoon, and everything was as dry as a tinder box. The sun had been overcast since early afternoon, and the hope of rain was in everybody's mind, but there was no hint of rain's freshness in the hot west wind, only a queer hot smell. In the middle of the afternoon John's dog came and scratched at the schoolhouse door and gave 3 or 4 short troubled barks. When no one paid him any attention, he came around to the window. By standing on his hind legs and putting his front paws on the side of the schoolhouse, he could just manage to look in the window. He looked around, trying to see Caddie among the other children. Then he put on his mouth and uttered a long, unhappy howl, followed by several short barks. The children began to titter, and Miss Parker rapped sharply on her desk. "Caroline Woodlawn," she said, will you please look to your dog?" Caddie rose obediently and went to the window to send her dog away, but what she had intended saying to the dog never came out. Instead, she turned back to the schoolroom, her hands flung in the air, her eyes wide. "Teacher, it's a fire! It's a prairie fire! It's coming here!" "Fire!" cried the children. They sprang out of their seats, throwing the quiet schoolroom into a hubbub. Miss Parker rapped again on her desk. Her face was stunningly pale, but she cried out in a strong voice, "Get your back into your seats, every one of you! Don't you dare to move until I tell you what you may." No danger was greater than the teacher's voice. When she spoke like that, every child but one sank back into her seat. That one was Obadiah, who had gone out of the door like a shot at the first word of fire.